black people ended up imprisoned in workhouses, prisons, hospitals, psychiatric facilities, and concentration camps. In 1941, Jack Branson, Gert's father, was arrested during one of his visits to Germany on the basis of the Nazi racial laws and deported to the Auschwitz concentration camp. There is no trace of him after that. However, Gert Schramm was no exception either. He was arrested in May 1944. Officially, he was taken into protective custody by the Gestapo under the law for the protection of German blood and honor, as his father was an Afro-American man. For weeks, he was moved from one Gestapo prison to another, denied food and water, beaten up, hit in the face, and knocked around, until on the 20th of July, 1944, when he was finally deported to the Buchenwald concentration camp, which was one of the largest Nazi concentration camps established within German borders. He was 15 years old when the gate with the inscription, Jedem das Seine, meaning to each what he deserves, closed behind him. From that moment on, Gert was not called by his name anymore. He became only a number. 49489, which was tattooed on his left arm. His sentence was an unspecified time, to be no less than 15 years. Prisoners lived in the Buchenwald main camp, which was surrounded by an electrified barbed wire fence, watchtowers, and a chain of sentries outfitted with automatic machine guns. At the entrance to the main camp, there was a notorious punishment block known as the bunker, where prisoners who violated the camp regulations were punished and often tortured to death. In addition to the punishment block, the main camp included 33 wooden barracks, disinfection buildings, a brothel, and a crematorium. Most of the early inmates at Buchenwald were political prisoners, people who had been arrested for some form of political opposition to the Nazi regime. In addition to the political prisoners and Jews, Buchenwald prisoners also included repeat offenders, Jehovah's Witnesses, Sinti and Roma people, and German military deserters. In Buchenwald, Gert had to do heavy forced labor. During this time, he was buried in a satellite commando during an air raid by an Allied bomber. He later recalled, "I suffered a severe head wound in the attack. Despite this, the parlor service didn't want to send me to the infirmary at first, because they were afraid I might not come back." An injured prisoner could be quickly classified as a useless eater in the SS manner and simply hosed down. But the wound became infected and I developed a fever. With a heavy heart, my blockmates finally sent me to the outpatient clinic. Hours later, it was finally my turn, and the frightening pleasure of being treated personally by the head of the infirmary. He pushed me into the operating room, where a man was having his leg amputated without anesthesia. Then, he took one quick look at my head, and without warning, just ripped open the wound with a hook. I almost fainted from the intense pain. He grabbed some kind of pliers and tried to pull out a splinter of metal stuck in my skull. When that didn't work, he used a hammer and chisel to help. With every hit, I thought my head would fly apart. After that, for 3 long weeks, I was cared for by my comrades. 15-year-old Gert was then taken to Barracks 42, with the so-called political prisoners, where he met people who were friendly to him. Most were communists, who had been in Buchenwald for a long time, and therefore knew the camp well. They told Gert which work details were a little less bad, and how best to protect himself from beatings at roll call. The block senior, Otto Grozer, a Lower Saxony communist, sat down with Gert and gave him vital tips. Don't look SS men in the face, hide in the middle during roll call, just don't attract attention. Those tips would later save his life. In the camp, Gert was also forced to work in a limestone quarry, which supplied the material for the construction of buildings, roads, and paths. Labor in the quarry was one of the hardest occupations, and the survival rate of the prisoners was very low. Every day, up to 10 men were carried out dead from the quarry back to the main camp by Schramm and political prisoners he was put in with. Many died of exhaustion or were shot on the run by the SS. After 3 weeks in a quarry, a communist capo, Willy Bleicher, moved Gert to an easier job in the construction team, and finally he ended up in the carpentry workshop, where the working conditions were more bearable. Before the Buchenwald prisoners went to work, they were counted during roll call. If the numbers did not add up, roll call was prolonged and often took long hours, which could be especially tormenting for the prisoners, particularly in severe weather. Schramm later recalled how in the snow during cold winter days, they were ordered to stand outside with no food and water from 5 to 11 a.m. Schramm one saw a prisoner, a young Jew from Leipzig, named Wolfgang Kuhn, get stomped to death by an SS guard simply because he had moved during roll call. During roll calls, the unhealthy, or those who stood out, risked being sent to an extermination camp or killed on the spot. As the only black prisoner, he already stood out, and after weeks in the stone quarry, he was in a weakened state. The previously mentioned block senior, Otto Grosse, organized other inmates to surround him during the daily roll call, thus protecting him. The Buchenwald camp was liberated in April 1945. On the 8th of April 1945, Buchenwald camp prisoners, using a secret shortwave transmitter and small generator, sent the Morse code message, "To the Allies, to the army of General Patton. This is the Buchenwald concentration camp. SOS. We request help. They want to evacuate us. The SS want to destroy us." 3 minutes after the transmission, the desperate prisoners received the message, "Hold out. Rushing to your aid. Staff of 3rd Army." 3 days later, on the 11th of April, the US 6th Armored Division liberated Buchenwald and found more than 21,000 survivors who were weak and emaciated. They survived because when the Gestapo headquarters at Weimar telephoned the camp administration to announce that it was sending explosives to blow up any evidence of the camp, including its inmates, the Gestapo did not know that the administrators had already fled, and a prisoner answered the phone, informing headquarters that explosives would not be needed, as the camp had already been blown up, which was not true. After General Patton toured the camp, he ordered the mayor of the nearby city of Weimar to bring 1,000 citizens of Buchenwald to be shown the crematorium and other evidence of Nazi atrocities. The Americans wanted to ensure that the German people would take responsibility for Nazi crimes, instead of dismissing them as atrocity propaganda. Many of them were crying, and some of them even fainted after seeing the dead bodies, starved survivors behind barbed wire fences, as well as a table display of paintings on human skins, lampshades made of human skin, various parts of the human body preserved in alcohol, and 2 heads, which were shrunk to 1/5 of their normal size. When 1,000 citizens from Weimar visited Buchenwald, Gert Schramm was there. They claimed, "We did not know what was going on." However, Gert never believed them. Years after the ending of the war, he remembered thinking, "Now have a look what happened here with your acquiescence." Between July 1937 and April 1945, the SS imprisoned some 250,000 persons from all countries of Europe in Buchenwald. Exact mortality figures for the Buchenwald site can only be estimated, as camp authorities never registered a significant number of prisoners. The SS murdered at least 56,000 male prisoners in the Buchenwald camp system. Some 11,000 of them were Jews. In June 1945, Gert Schramm returned home, on foot, into a new life. He then worked at the Wismut uranium mine in the Soviet occupation zone. From 1956 to 1964, he worked in Essen in a coal mine, and then chose to move to East Germany. With the help of another former Buchenwald prisoner, Hermann Axen, who had been one of a group of communist prisoners who protected him during his imprisonment, he started his own business in 1985, Schramm's Reisen, a taxi company. As a member of the Prisoners' Advisory Board of the Buchenwald Memorial Foundation, Schramm for years visited schools to speak of the horrors of the Buchenwald camp. During one such visit in 2012, he said, "I wish our youth will never give in to these racist Nazi thugs, and they won't heed their views filled with hatred and racial discrimination." Gert Schramm was 87 years old when he died after a long illness on the 18th of April, 2016. Pieretta Herzberger-Fofana, his friend and a member of the European Parliament, believes he never fully recovered from his country's rejection of him because of the color of his skin. "He was an unhappy man," she said. Gert's revenge was not only that he survived and lectured for years about the hardship he endured during the Nazi regime, but that his legacy and bravery will go on through his family, as after the war he got married and had 4 grown children, was a grandfather and great-grandfather. He left to the generations to come a message of peace and reconciliation. There were many tears shed for Gert Schramm.